Ethan had been single for too long, or at least that's what his friends always told him. Tired of the loneliness, he finally gave in and downloaded a dating app. It wasn't long before he matched with a woman named Lila. Beautiful, charming, and seemingly perfect in every way. They chatted for a few days, and when she suggested meeting for dinner, he eagerly agreed. The restaurant was cozy, lit by warm candlelight. Lila was even more stunning in person, her smile enchanting. Conversation flowed effortlessly, and Ethan felt something he hadn't in years: connection. Hours passed, yet neither of them seemed to mind. The restaurant began to empty, and the waiters subtly hinted that it was closing time. But as Ethan glanced at his watch, he frowned. It was still 8:30 p.m. Strange. He was certain they had been talking for at least 3 hours. Shaking off the unease, he reached for his glass of wine, but a sudden dizziness washed over him. His vision blurred, and the restaurant around him seemed to waver, as though the walls were breathing. When he blinked, everything snapped back to normal. Lila smiled at him, tilting her head slightly. "Something wrong?" she asked sweetly. "No, just, I must be more tired than I thought," Ethan replied, forcing a chuckle. They continued talking, but the strange feeling lingered. The air in the restaurant felt heavy, charged. The candles flickered violently, despite the absence of any wind. Then Ethan noticed something chilling. The background noise, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of other diners, had disappeared. He and Lila were the only ones left. "I think we should go," Ethan said, pushing his chair back. Lila's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "But we're having such a good time." Her voice was different, lower, almost distorted. The restaurant seemed to stretch and warp, as if reality itself was shifting. Ethan's heart pounded as he yanked his hand away and stood up. He rushed to the exit, but no matter how far he walked, the door never got any closer. Panic set in. He turned back to Lila, who was still seated, watching him with an eerie smile. "You can't leave," she said softly. "It's our date, Ethan, and it never ends." He ran to a window, but the outside world was gone. Only an endless black void stared back at him. He turned in circles, searching for a way out, but the restaurant was no longer a restaurant. The walls pulsed like a living thing. The ceiling stretched upward into darkness. Lila stood now, her features warping and twisting, her eyes turning into hollow pits. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide. Ethan screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. The next morning, the restaurant reopened as usual. The waitstaff prepared tables, completely unaware of the couple still sitting at one of the dimly lit booths. Ethan and Lila, frozen in time, locked in an eternal conversation. No one noticed the faint whispers that echoed through the air. No one saw Ethan's silent, desperate scream behind his hollowed eyes, and no one ever would. Elena sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the calendar. February 14th, Valentine's Day. A day she once cherished, now nothing more than a painful reminder of what she had lost. It had been exactly a year since Daniel, her fiancé, died in a tragic accident. She sighed, rubbing her temples, trying to block out the memories. But the loneliness was suffocating, the silence deafening. A sudden knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitant, she approached the door and peeked through the peephole. No one was there. Puzzled, she opened the door just a crack. A small box sat on the doorstep, wrapped in elegant black paper with a blood-red ribbon tied around it. There was no return address, no indication of who sent it. Elena knelt down, her fingers trembling as she picked up the box and carried it inside. Sitting on the couch, she carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a heart-shaped locket, old but polished, gleaming in the dim light. Her breath hitched when she noticed a tiny engraving on the back. "Forever yours, Daniel." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. How? How could this be? Daniel had given her a similar locket before he died, but it had been lost in the accident. A wave of unease washed over her, but curiosity overpowered the fear. She opened the locket. Inside was a photo of the two of them, smiling, frozen in time. Then the whispers began. At first they were faint, just a murmur in the background. But as the night went on, they grew louder. Elena could hear her name being called in a voice achingly familiar. "Elena, my love." Her body stiffened. She spun around, her eyes darting across the room. No one was there. She told herself it was her mind playing tricks on her, the weight of grief resurfacing. But then the air grew cold. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched unnaturally, twisting and curling like skeletal fingers reaching for her. The whispers turned to sobs, then to pleading. "Wear it, please. I need you." Tears welled in her eyes. It was Daniel's voice. It had to be. But he was gone. He had been gone for a year. A part of her knew she should throw the locket away, burn it, get rid of it. But another part, one desperate for his touch, his presence, longed to believe he was still with her. Her trembling fingers lifted the locket and fastened it around her neck. The moment the clasp clicked into place, the room plunged into darkness. The temperature dropped and Elena's breath came out in a ghostly mist. A cold hand caressed her cheek. She gasped, her pulse hammering as she turned, and found herself staring into the pale, lifeless face of Daniel. His eyes were hollow, sunken, yet filled with a sorrow so deep it threatened to consume her. His lips trembled, forming silent words. His hand reached for her, but he did not touch her. "Elena." His voice was barely a whisper, an echo from beyond. "You promised, forever." Her heart clenched. She had promised. They had sworn to love each other until death. But he was dead, and she was not. His eyes darkened, his expression shifting from sorrow to something else. Desperation, obsession. "You belong to me," he whispered, "and I belong to you." The shadows twisted, enveloping Elena. Her chest tightened as the locket burned against her skin. The pain was unbearable, searing, as if her very soul was being pulled from her body. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The room blurred, the apartment around her faded, dissolving into an abyss of endless darkness. Then, silence. The next morning, Elena's landlord knocked on her door, concerned after hearing strange noises the night before. When no one answered, he used his spare key and stepped inside. The apartment was cold, empty. The only sign that Elena had ever been there was a single object resting on the coffee table, a heart-shaped locket gleaming in the morning light. The landlord picked it up, flipping it over to read the engraving. "Forever yours, Elena." The small town of Ravenswood had always celebrated Valentine's Day with grand festivities. Couples walked the snow-dusted streets, exchanging flowers and chocolates, while love songs played from every shop. But hidden beneath the town's romantic glow was a dark legend, one that few dared to speak of. They called it the Curse of the Bloody Valentine. It began decades ago with a woman named Eleanor Blackwell, a lonely soul whose heart was broken one too many times. On Valentine's night, she was found dead in her home, her body surrounded by torn-up love letters and a single heart-shaped box filled with something far worse than chocolates: severed fingers. Her last note, scrawled in blood, read, "Love me forever or die trying." Since then, every February 14th, a series of gruesome murders plagued Ravenswood. Victims were found with their hearts missing, their blood smeared on the walls in the shape of a heart. A calling card left at each scene read the same chilling words, "Be my bloody Valentine." This year was no different. Emily and her boyfriend Ryan had planned a quiet Valentine's evening. They had heard the stories, of course, but like most of the town's younger generation, They dismissed them as nothing more than urban legend. The night was perfect. Candlelit dinner, soft music, and an unopened gift box that sat between them on the table. "Go on, open it," Ryan said with a grin. Emily chuckled and lifted the lid, then froze. Nestled inside the velvet box was a bloodied heart, still warm. She screamed and shoved the box away, her pulse hammering in her ears. Ryan paled, his eyes widening in horror. Then the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the flickering glow of the candles. A sharp scraping sound echoed through the apartment, like metal dragging against stone. "Who's there?" Ryan called out, stepping in front of Emily protectively. A whisper slithered through the air. "Be my bloody Valentine." A sudden force knocked Ryan across the room, his body crashing into the wall. Emily barely had time to react before she felt cold fingers brush against her cheek. She turned and found herself staring into a face she would never forget. Eleanor Blackwell. Her eyes were hollow voids, her mouth twisted into a bloodied grin. A tattered red dress clung to her skeletal frame, and in her hands she held a jagged knife, dripping with crimson. Emily's scream barely left her throat before the blade slashed downward. The next morning, the town awoke to the news of another tragedy. The apartment was drenched in blood, heart-shaped symbols drawn across the walls. Ryan was missing. And Emily sat at the table, her eyes vacant, her lips curved into a lifeless smile. In her hands, she held a blood-stained note written in jagged handwriting. "Be mine, forever." The town of Blackwood had a Valentine's Day tradition that no one spoke of, yet everyone feared. Each year, a man in a tattered black coat and wide-brimmed hat would appear in the town square, handing out single red roses to unsuspecting couples. He was called the Red Rose Man. No one knew where he came from. No one knew when he would leave. But those who accepted his rose were never seen again. It was said that many years ago, a man named Victor Holloway had been left heartbroken on Valentine's Day when his fiancée, Eleanor, had been found murdered in their home. Her body was surrounded by crimson petals, her lifeless fingers clutching a single red rose. The townspeople whispered that Victor, in his grief, had made a pact with something dark, something beyond the world of the living. Now, every February 14th, he returned to claim the love that was stolen from him. On this particular Valentine's Day, a young couple, Claire and Jake, were walking hand in hand through the town square when they noticed a strange figure standing near the old fountain. The man was tall and gaunt, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. In his gloved hand, he held a bouquet of blood-red roses. "Would you like a rose?" His voice rasped, barely above a whisper. Claire hesitated, but Jake chuckled. "Why not? It's free." As he reached out and took the rose, a sudden gust of wind howled through the square. The streetlights flickered and a chill ran down Claire's spine. She grabbed Jake's arm. "Let's go." That night, as they settled in at Jake's apartment, Claire couldn't shake the uneasy feeling clawing at her chest. She stared at the rose on the nightstand, its petals unusually deep in color, almost as if they were soaked in something. Around midnight, Jake stirred in his sleep, mumbling incoherently. Then he began to whimper, his body trembling as if caught in a nightmare. "Jake," Claire whispered, shaking him gently. His eyes flew open, but they were wrong, completely black, like a void. A guttural sound erupted from his throat, and his lips curled into an unnatural grin. "The Red Rose Man," he whispered, his voice not his own. "He's coming for you." Claire screamed and scrambled away from the bed, her heart hammering in her chest. Jake convulsed violently before letting out an ear-piercing shriek. The room went dark. When the lights flickered back on, Jake was gone. The bed was empty, except for a single red rose, its petals now withered and blackened at the edges. Shaking, Claire grabbed her phone and tried to call him, but the call wouldn't go through. Desperate, she ran to the front door, only to find a figure standing just outside the window. The Red Rose Man. His hat was tilted upward just enough for Claire to see the hollow sockets where his eyes should have been. In his outstretched hand, another red rose. Her blood turned to ice. She slammed the door shut and backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. The whispers started then, soft at first, then rising into an eerie chant. The walls pulsed, the air thick with the scent of roses and something metallic, something like blood. The last thing Claire heard before darkness swallowed her whole was the whispering voice of the Red Rose Man. "Would you like a rose?" The next morning, the town awoke to find Claire and Jake missing. The only thing left in Jake's apartment was a withered rose, resting on the bed where they had last been seen. And in the town square, the Red Rose Man stood once again, waiting for another pair of lovers to take his cursed gift.